some new names and faces, so welcome everyone. Megan's going to throw up a slide right now for our residents who prefer to hear this in Spanish. There is a way to, in Zoom, to switch over to channels in the Zoom Spanish channel. So can you flash it up, Megan, to let folks know how to do that?
We're working on it.
Okay.
Our first technical difficulty.
Hey, we talked about this the other night at City Council. Whenever you have to display a desktop, that's where everything goes south. You can see it behind Bill.
Where is it, Megan?
Try pressing the X and getting back in.
Is it back there?
You see your desktop.
Greg, can you close out of that? Well, we had this all set up about 5 minutes ago. Sorry about that, folks.
You rehearse, and then everything, something always goes haywire on you.
So don't hit slideshow yet. Just go to Zoom. You're actually screen sharing, so hit stop share. And then share screen again. Oh no, go back to Zoom. Sorry, you have to click up there. And then this little
Nice that the weather changed a little bit. Got a little bit of blue sky. That's what we had this morning.
and then there you go.
Oh, there it is.
All right.
How about that?
All right. Now you're a pro. All right. For those folks who would prefer to hear this presentation tonight in Spanish, you'll see the directions there on the slide. We have a Spanish translator who'll be translating live as we go through the presentation. So if we're speaking a little bit slow tonight for folks, it's so the translator can keep up with us. So why are we having this conversation tonight? Well, with the murder of George Floyd a few months ago, there was a nationwide movement to review police use of force tactics and policies. So I took a pledge and joined hundreds of other cities in that pledge to lead the city through a review process of our police use of force policies and tactics so that the community could be aware of what the police can do, and then review those things and say, hey, you know what, maybe we want to rethink this, or we're okay with everything that the police have done. So we're going to have a series of 3 meetings to review the police use of force, have a community Q&A, have a community discussion, and then those results will go to City Council for review and any needed changes that we have to do. The City of Tualatin is committed to being actively anti-racist and to work with the community to evaluate and make any needed changes that we need to do. So as I mentioned, this is the first of 3 community conversations that we'll be holding. Each one has a different agenda. Tonight is mainly a presentation from the police department on things you need to know about the police policies. And then we'll give you links, if you haven't already done so, to look at the written police policies, the police contract, so that between now and the next meeting, you can be prepared with questions for the police department that they will answer. If you cannot attend all 3 sessions, we will be recording them. Tonight's is being recorded. So if you miss something tonight, or you have a friend who misses it tonight and would like to see it, It will be recorded and available on the website. So ground rules for tonight. First thing, be respectful of everyone's lived experiences. Some folks have a different experience with the police department than you might have. Listen to others. Please don't interrupt folks when they're speaking or asking questions. And when you do ask a question or post a comment or ask a comment, please limit that to about 3 minutes because we want to give everyone a good amount of time to let us know how they feel. So like I said, tonight's agenda is we'll have several police officers that you might know. And first off is Police Chief Bill Steele will be presenting tonight for a little bit. He'll also be followed by Patrol Services Captain Greg Pickering and Patrol Sergeant Chris Turner. We'll also have on the call here, the Zoom meeting to assist us, if you haven't seen her yet, is Megan George, and she will help us facilitate. Also on the Zoom meeting is our city manager, Sherilyn Lombos. She's there, and I saw that Councilor Paul Morrison is also joining us tonight, as is Valerie Pratt. I lost the ability to see who else is there, but hopefully other councilors will join us as they can. We have about an hour-long presentation tonight for you to see. If you have questions, please use the chat feature. Megan has that up here on how to access the chat. So, it should be in the bottom of your screen. If you move your mouse, you'll see the chat icon. You click on that, and that's where you can post questions that Megan will track for the police department. It'll be time dependent on what questions we can answer tonight. If there are lots of them, Chief Steele and his folks will prioritize the ones they can answer immediately. And if we can't, we will get back to you with those answers. At the end of the presentation tonight, we're going to batch all the questions together. And then Megan will work with the police department to get the answers out to the community for the second session. So some housekeeping items. As I mentioned, the session is being recorded and will be posted on our website next week. There's a big gap between now and the second meeting, and that's on purpose. So folks who missed tonight can watch tonight's recording and then get questions to the police department and Megan for our next session. Since we're doing a Zoom meeting, it's difficult to do a sign-in sheet. We'd like to capture your email addresses so we can follow up after this meeting with information on the next session. If you'd be so kind to email Megan George, and I believe she has a slide. Oh, Bridget Brooks is there. I just got a little chat here. Bridget Brooks has joined us, another city councilor. So Megan will ask, we'll have a slide here shortly. If you email your contact information to mgeorge@tualatin.gov, or you can text it to 971-201-1571. Again, it's mgeorge@tualatin.gov, or text it to 971-201-1571. And we'll have a slide for you to jot that down. So with that, that's enough of me talking. Let's turn this over to Police Chief Steele.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. And again, thank you for taking time out of your night to spend with us. We've got a lot of information to cover. I really apologize that we can't do this in person. I think it's more meaningful that way, but this is the best we can do, and we're gonna make it happen tonight and get you the information that I think is important and that you'll need and would be helpful in the future. This is going to be a lot of information crammed into about an hour. Honestly, the information we're going to present tonight is the same information that we will present to new police officers when we hire them. The difference is what we're going to cover in an hour tonight. A police officer usually spends up to about a year learning the same information over and over and over. But we're going to get through it tonight. It's going to be pretty high level at this point. Again, the goal tonight is to provide some information, let you start formulating some questions. We'll do our best to answer some tonight, but then you can again come back in about a month and we're going to really dive into some of those questions you have after you have more time to read through some of the policies and procedures that we operate within in the department. So kind of starting off about our department, we have a pretty firm mission in the police department, and that's to provide a safe community and excellence in customer service to everyone in Tualatin. I honestly believe that our folks are technically very proficient at what they do, but in addition to that, and what is just as equally, if not more important, is how we deal with and how we treat people. And that's where that customer service aspect comes in. That is a very important role that we have in our communities in how we treat people. We look at internally, our department vision and our values really gets into the human side of what we do. Talks about how we want to improve the livability of our community and how we're going to treat people. We see ourselves as not only a family within the department, but also our community is our family, and that's where it's kind of our role as our family is there to take care of your family, and we take great pride in that. Our organization, a lot of people don't even know much about the department and how many staff we have. We have 48 full-time employees. Not all of them are certified police officers. We have about 40 certified police officers. That includes myself, 2 captains, 6 sergeants, and then the rest are our officers assigned to various duties and responsibilities. So as a department, we're proud to be here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Whenever people need us, we're going to be there for them. And how we accomplish that is we break it down to make sure we have the right number of people working at the right time of the day throughout the week. Not only responding to calls for service, but also out there enforcing traffic laws, handling graffiti complaints, those livability type issues that pop up in the neighborhoods. This is an organizational chart. If you start from my left and work towards the right, it breaks it down from our day shift officers, our swing shift officers, night shift officers, and it gets kind of into our community services section, which includes motorcycle officers, our community services officer. We have a person assigned to the transit team for TriMet throughout the metro region, full-time detectives, and then record staff, property evidence staff. It seems like a lot of people, but again, when you spread them out throughout the week, all day long, they go pretty quick. We're currently fully staffed. Technically, we have 1 officer that just retired a couple of weeks ago, so we'll be in the process of replacing him over the next few months. And one of our officers is actually deployed to Afghanistan right now and has been gone for a little over a year serving our country in the National Guard. So that's kind of just a brief snapshot of what our department looks like in the staffing levels within the department and kind of how we spread those resources out amongst the department. Now I want to get into a little bit about how we do our jobs, where kind of that authority comes from, whether it be state certification, state statutes, administrative rules, kind of the technical aspect of how police officers in Oregon do their job. Every certified police officer that we have here goes through basic levels of certification through the state of Oregon. Then in addition to that, we have our supervisors and managers that have additional training and responsibilities that come along with that. So every person that gets hired into police work in Oregon goes through a 16-week police academy in Salem, and then they return back to their home agency for about another 17 weeks of training. So really, when you get hired as a police officer in Oregon, you're going to spend about a good full year of training with another officer before you're released to solo status to be out there in the community driving around a patrol car by yourself. So there's a lot that goes into that training when we first hire people. And then in addition to the initial training, every police officer in Oregon that's certified has to go through additional number of hours of training every single year to maintain that level of certification. It's 8 hours of training required in specific subjects such as use of force. We get into requirements for ethics training, crisis intervention training, first aid, CPR. So there's a lot of training that police officers have to go through every single year just to maintain that basic level of certification. And then in addition to that, anybody in a supervisor or management role has additional training that they're required to complete every single year. Every police officer that comes into this profession, they take and swear to a code of ethics that's administered at the State Police Academy when they graduate from the academy. Something that we do that's a little bit unique, I think, in our department is we have officers every single year when they receive a performance evaluation. read through that code of ethics again and just kind of read and acknowledge. And it's kind of a remembrance of what they agreed to do as a police officer when they came into this line of work. It's something that you'll have available to you if you choose to read through our policy manual. It's included in our policy manual. And again, it's something that we feel is very important for our police officers to remember, not only when they come into the career, but throughout the rest of their career as well. A lot of what we do comes from state statute. There are specific statutes that talk about what peace officers do. You will notice I use the term peace officer. We don't have a legal definition of police officers per state statute. We are peace officers in the state of Oregon. There's a number of duties that come along with that through state statute, to include, as you can see here, preventing and deterring crime, arresting offenders, issuing citations, things like that. What's not really captured here, except in maybe preserving the peace and the safety of the public, would be how to handle homeless situations and people suffering with mental illness. Those types of things that police officers become involved in on a regular basis that aren't coming specifically from a statute, but it's a responsibility that we take very heavily on what we do every single day that isn't necessarily coming from the law itself. I'm going to get into the legal aspects of use of force, and then we're going to turn it over to Sergeant Turner to kind of come into discuss some of the more specifics about use of force and really what that entails. So at this point, I'm going to kind of remind you, if you've got questions, put them in the chat function, and we're going to start reviewing those and see if we can answer some of those tonight. But then we'll be diving into those deeper in the next coming month. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sergeant Turner. He's going to pop up here and take my place in front of the computer, and we'll go from there.
All right. Well, this is my turn here with the PowerPoint. And so we're just going to talk about an overall comprehensive view about the legal aspects of use of force, what grants us the authority to use this force, and then how are we judged when we use this force. So I'm first going to look at our state statutes, and you'll note that Oregon Revised Statute 161235 is listed up there. And this grants police officers the authority to use physical force in making an arrest or in preventing an escape. And then if you'll notice, I highlighted the word that we can use the force when the peace officer reasonably believes it necessary. That's going to become key here when we look at some of the case law that defines what reasonably means. So under state law, we're able to use reasonable force to make an arrest or prevent the escape from custody of an arrested person, unless we know that the arrest is unlawful, and also allows us to defend ourselves or to defend the third person from what we reasonably believe the use of imminent physical force while making or attempting to make an arrest or preventing an escape. And adding on to that, Oregon Revised Statute 161239 just kind of deals with the use of deadly physical force in making an arrest. So we may use deadly physical force only when the peace officer reasonably believes that, and then it goes through a laundry list here of different subsections. I won't be so dry as to read directly from them, but it basically lists some situations in which we are able to use deadly force, which is different than just physical force. And then again, it qualifies it all there. And if you see subsection 2, that nothing giving us the authority to use deadly physical force justifies reckless or criminally negligent conduct by a peace officer amounting to an offense against or respect to innocent persons with whom the peace officer is not seeking to arrest or take into custody. So I highlighted the reasonably parts of those statutes. And so we're going to kind of dive into what is reasonable. And if you're expecting the bright line rule of what is and what isn't, well, I'm afraid to be just a little disappointed, because you'll find that there's a lot of facts and circumstances that go into this equation and what determines what's reasonable use of force. And so how did we get these definitions? They came through when police officers are sued under 42 United States Code Section 1983, and that's a civil action for deprivation of rights or excessive use of force is what we would just use it in common terms. And the seminal case that really kind of defined what reasonable is in the use of force is Graham versus Connor, which was issued by the United States Supreme Court in 1989. And it is, sorry here, there we go. So this is the constitutional standard which governs a citizen's claim against law enforcement's officials who use excessive force when making an arrest, investigatory stop, or other seizure of their person. And so just some highlights from the court case. It's several pages long, so we won't sit and read the whole thing, but just some highlights picked up from there. That the court stated that our Fourth Amendment jurisprudence has long recognized that the right to make an arrest or investigatory stop necessarily carries with it the right to use some degree of physical coercion or threat thereof to effect it. And it held that all claims of excessive force, deadly or not, are properly analyzed under the Fourth Amendment's objective reasonableness standard. Okay, so what's that? Well, they'll tell us a little bit here. So the test of reasonableness under the Fourth Amendment is not capable of precise definition or mechanical application. In fact, I think the court refers to it as sloshing its way through the fact-bound morass of reasonableness. And if you're like me, I had to look up what morass meant, and that just means a complicated or confusing situation. But the proper application of this test, it requires careful attention to the facts and circumstances of each particular case, including the severity of the crime at issue, whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the safety of the officers or others, and whether the suspect is actively resisting or attempting to evade arrest by flight. So when you're looking at those circumstances, you have to use the lens of the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene rather than with the 20/20 vision of hindsight. And the reasonable officer would be defined as, would another officer with the same or similar training and experience facing like or similar circumstances respond the same way or use similar judgment? So this calculus embodies the allowance for the fact that police officers were often forced to make split-second judgments in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving, and these are the Supreme Court's words, not mine, about the amount of force that is necessary in a particular situation. And so they look a lot at the totality of the circumstances. And so examples of these circumstances that the court will consider when determining whether or not use of force is reasonable include like the number of suspects versus the number of officers involved, any pre-assault indicators that are observed by the officer. Examples of that would be a fighting stance, clenched fists, or statements like, I'm not going back to jail, or you're gonna have to fight me if you wanna take me in the handcuffs. Just those are some examples of what would be called pre-assault indicators. They also would look at the size, age, and physical condition of the officer and suspect. Any known or perceived physical abilities of the suspect, like if we know this guy is a known MMA fighter or national champion wrestler or anything like that, that we know and we have knowledge of, that we would have to maybe elevate our use of force if they prove to be a resistive suspect. We also look at previous violent or behavioral health history known to the officer at the time. We can also have 20/20 vision in terms of maybe we learned something after the use of force. It has to be known to us at the time. Any perception of the use of alcohol or drugs by the subject, the availability and proximity to weapons, environmental factors, whether there's an injury to the officer or if there's a prolonged duration of the incident. If you've ever been involved in any kind of wrestling, boxing, or any sort of physical altercation that lasts, I mean, even if you're in it a minute and 2 minutes, the amount of exhaustion that you face also plays into maybe having to elevate that use of force. Whether or not the officer is on the ground or other unfavorable position, and if the subject shows any characteristics of being armed. And that's any bulges or adjustment of clothing or security touches or indexing. Oftentimes you'll see if they're trying to hide something, they'll touch it, make sure it's still there, or making sure it's adjusted in the belt line or wherever it is that they may be concealing such a weapon. And so at the Tualatin Police Department, we utilize the lexicol policy system, and our police department policy manual is updated on a biannual basis to stay current with changes in the law, practice, and procedure. And each officer is responsible for reviewing and acknowledging the changes in policy with each update. And so those policies include our use of force policy. And just in terms of defining what use of force is, there's no universally agreed upon definition of it, but the International Association of Chiefs of Police, they define the use of force as the amount of effort required by police to compel compliance by an unwilling subject. I'm just going to go briefly through what are some generally recognized levels or types of force. And the first, and this is our, every time we show up on a call, this is always presence, and this is just the officer's presence. There's no force used. It's considered our best and most desirable way to resolve a situation. We're hoping that the mere presence of a law enforcement officer works to deter crime or to defuse a situation. Generally, we train our officers that our attitudes are professional and non-threatening so that we're not elevating or amping up a situation when we just show up to a call for service. Going up from that would be verbalization. The force is not physical. We're trained to issue calm, non-threatening commands such as, let me see your identification and registration. However, this may get increased with volume and shortened commands in an attempt to gain compliance. So short commands might include stop, don't move, let me see your hands. And obviously it gets a little more tense, the more resistant the subject may be considering the circumstances. Then we move up to empty hand control. And this is where officers use bodily force to gain control of the situation. And we have what's called a soft technique where we're using grabs, holds, or joint locks to restrain an individual. And then you have hard techniques where we use punches and kicks to restrain an individual. Then beyond that is less lethal, serious physical control. And here we use less lethal technologies to gain control of the situation. And examples of these are blunt impact tools. So we may use a baton or a projectile to immobilize or gain compliance of a combative person. There's also chemical, which is officers use chemical sprays or projectiles embedded with chemicals to restrain an individual. And the example given is pepper spray, which is the only chemical that the Tualatin Police Department uses. And then we also have conducted energy devices, or what you also may know as the taser. And these help to immobilize an individual for a short period of time, allow officers to gain physical control, place them into handcuffs and control the situation to make sure that there's no elevated uses of force beyond that, and to end the confrontation as quickly as possible to decrease the likelihood of injury to the suspect and ourselves. And then obviously have the top, which is lethal force. And officers, we use our lethal weapons to gain control of a situation. These should only be used if a suspect poses a serious threat to the officer or another individual. So we would use deadly weapons such as firearms, or some of our less lethal tools, if used in a manner, could also be used for deadly force. Obviously, we train to avoid those being used in that manner, but if the situation is reasonable for us to use lethal force, then those less lethal tools may be used in that manner. And then I'm getting here to the use of force policy for the Tualatin Police Department, and I'm going to hand it over to, oh, pardon me. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Sergeant Turner. Before I turn it over to Captain Pickering, I just wanted to touch on a few things. As you can see, there's a lot of information here that is being presented, and I know it can probably be a little bit overwhelming. It doesn't make sense in a lot of ways, but it's a good example of how much information that a police officer has to quickly process in those situations where they're contemplating, am I in a position where I should be using force? If I am going to use force, at what level of force? So it can be pretty overwhelming, but it's something that the officers have to process very, very quickly. So again, our hope tonight is that you start taking some of this information and help you formulate kind of what those questions might be for the next session, so that we can kind of start walking through that at a level a little bit lower than what you're seeing here tonight. This is just to kind of help establish that legal basis of knowledge on how police officers work in the state. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Captain Pickering, and he's going to give you a few examples of what we use.
Thanks, Chief. So first thing we'll touch on is the use of force policy. Just a brief overview of policy 300 of the Tualatin Police Department. So this policy encapsulates all current standards, legal standards for the reasonable use of force by Tualatin officers. And again, in addition, the policy includes the current best practices in regards to police use of force, some of which has now been entered into Oregon state law. This includes the duty of officers to intercede when another officer is using clearly unreasonable force and the reporting of that use of force to a supervisor. Our policy prohibits the use of a carotid hold unless that deadly force is warranted or is reasonable. And officers should use de-escalation tactics when circumstances reasonably permit to decrease the intensity of the situation, improve decision-making, improve communication, reduce the need for force, and increase voluntary compliance. So the following information is a brief overview of the training concepts and programs used to train members of the department in the areas of use of force. As stated earlier, each member of the department is required to attend a minimum number of training hours each year. So as described by Sergeant Turner, so as we work through the levels of force, the Tualatin Police Department trains their officers in defensive tactics that rely on instinctual gross motor movements rather than specific techniques. So it's not a martial arts based program. Our techniques rely on fine motor skills and are impossible for the average officer to apply under stress. Our methods allow officers reasonably to protect themselves and to protect others. Just a description of some of the less lethal tools and the training concepts that go with them. So oleoresin capsicum or OC spray, which is pepper spray. Tualatin officers are equipped with the Saber Red Crossfire brand of OC spray. OC spray is designed to give officers a temporary advantage over a combative suspect or subject in a way in the subject's primary sense of fighting, their sight, and creating a physiological effect. Officers are trained on how to properly treat the subjects after they've been exposed to OC and to monitor for possible adverse health issues that may arise from the exposures. Expandable batons. Tualatin officers are issued expandable batons that are used as an impact device when confronted with a combative subject. Officers are trained in the appropriate target areas, which are the large muscle groups, and they're trained to avoid dangerous areas being the head, neck, spine, and etc. This is to lower the risk of serious physical injury or death to the subjects. The taser, or conductive electric weapon. Tualatin police officers are issued a taser device that is intended to control a violent or potentially violent individual while minimizing the risk of serious injury. The appropriate use of the device should result in fewer serious injuries to the officer and to the subject. Officers are trained in the appropriate target areas, which again are the large muscle groups, and to avoid dangerous areas, which would be the head, neck, groin, and again, to lower the risk of serious physical injury to the subject. For defense purpose or discussion purposes, sure I can get this in the frame, but this device is the Taser X2, which the Tualatin officers are issued. It is made by Axon, and this is the device that Tualatin officers would carry on their person. The 40 millimeter. Tualatin officers are trained in the use of a 40 millimeter launchers that fires what is called a foam, a baton round. The baton rounds are considered an extended range impact weapon designed to be used as an impact device when confronted with a combative subject, but to do so at safe distance. Officers are trained in the appropriate target areas, again, large muscle groups, to avoid dangerous areas, which are the head, neck, and spine, again, to lower the risk of serious physical injury or death. So we describe a 40 millimeter. This is what we would call an extended range impact weapon, or a 40 millimeter round. It is a spongy foam tip, so it's not hard. Again, it's meant to be used as an impact weapon from distance, the distance being usually anywhere from 25 to 75 feet against a combative subject, again, to try to be so in a safe distance for the officer and for the subject. And then as we rise to the levels of force, our firearms training program. So Tualatin police officers are issued department-owned firearms. Each firearm is owned, maintained, and inspected annually by the department. Officers are not allowed to modify or change the firearm for any reason. Officers are required to pass annual qualifications with all firearms that they carry. The department qualification course is a state's certified course. Officers train in multiple areas, which include safe firearms handling, safe firearms storage, shooting in different lighting and weather conditions, shoot, no shoot situations, and de-escalation techniques to avoid the use of firearms if necessary. Every Tualatin officer participates in annual scenario training on patrol tactics. The scenario training includes critical thinking training, which places officers in situations and scenarios they may encounter while working. The training is designed to present scenarios where officers may face where force may be or may not be warranted. Officers must navigate through the scenario under the guidance of instructors from all of the department's training disciplines to ensure that they are following the laws, ordinances, policies, and proper procedures when dealing with these situations. The scenarios are focused on appropriate use of forces if necessary, de-escalation techniques, and then appropriate aid to be rendered if force is used, followed by the proper documentation of the event. So that encapsulates the training programs surrounding use of force, and again, in a brief high-level overview. So the information that is on your screen now is use of force data from what we call our threshold events database, which we keep every year on every threshold event. Now you notice that there is threshold event and uses of force. Uses of force we would define as an actual use of force, be that a control hold, an application of a less lethal device, or in some circumstances, the use of deadly force. A threshold event is an event where we document any situation where we would display force or we would use more than our presence, but less than an actual control hold or use of force. So there is the graph, but I will go to the actual numbers. So you can see that through 2017, through the year to date, the threshold events, this year we have 87 threshold events with 29 actual uses of force. And again, I'd like to point out, if you notice the columns, that we've had no complaints of bias-based policing. And we've had, up until this year, we've had no excessive use of force complaints. And if you notice that the one complaint that we did have this year, anytime that we take a complaint of this nature, it is a full-blown investigation internally. During that internal investigation, the complainant had the opportunity to watch the holding cell video where the alleged excessive use of force took place. And after the complainant watched the video, the complainant actually rescinded his complaint of use of force and agreed that the force that was used by the officers in the situation was within policy and was proper for the situation. This following information is stop data. So the state of Oregon requires anytime an officer performs a traffic stop or a pedestrian stop on any person, at the end of the stop, we're required to document the demographics, the reason for the stop, and any other important data that comes out of the stop. Again, this would be for traffic stops or for pedestrian stops if we were to stop someone that's walking on the road or contact somebody in a situation. That data is reported to the state on a yearly basis. And this information now is for the 2020 information or the data having to do with the race of those that we stop as from January 1st until present. So that ends my portion. I'll turn it back over to Chief Steele.
All right, thanks, Captain Pickering. A couple things I wanted to kind of touch on that were discussed. We track everything that we can track in a reasonable manner. You know, every time we receive a call for service or somebody's contacted on a traffic stop, everything is captured that we can go back and review later if need be when it comes to time of the day, where it happened, who was contacted. He presented some information about how we track our threshold events. And really the intent of that is for us to kind of monitor the activities of what our staff are involved in, make sure we review that on an annual basis to ensure there's no patterns or behaviors that are starting to cause us concern or alarm. And if so, that we adjust accordingly. And a lot of that is done not only through the policy manual. I referenced earlier that, the hope is that at some point you'll take some time to look at our policy manual. I will tell you, it's about 620 pages. It is through a system it's fairly in depth on how it captures what we do and how we operate within a department. And it's updated on a regular basis as laws change, as new case law comes out. And then a lot of that is factored into what we do for what's called an accreditation process. So every couple of years, we have an outside entity. It's called the Oregon Accreditation Alliance that will come into our department and do an outside assessment of how we operate, just to make sure that we're meeting the best practices that are standards that are within our industry. That's something that's optional for departments to do. Not every police department in the state does that, but that's something that we've done for a number of years. And it's again, it makes sure that we're operating in the most efficient manner on how we deliver services to our community. So again, we track all of this information to make ourselves better. Captain Pickering mentioned the stop data. So the way that came up is some laws changed for our department. We were required by law to start capturing that data on traffic stops and subject stops going back to July of last year. That was the law. We felt that was a pretty important thing to do within our department. So we actually started capturing that data a little over 6 months, 7 months prior to that law kicking in. So we were capturing that data and looking at it before we were required to do so by law. Again, because we thought it was a good step to make sure that we were doing what we needed to do to take care of our community, but treat people equally throughout all parts of our city. So I'm pretty proud of the staff and how we operate, and we're really trying to do what we can to, meet the community needs, but doing it in a professional and compassionate manner as well. I know there was a couple questions that came in that I think Megan's going to bring up now that we've got a little bit of time that we can discuss. So I'll take a quick peek at them and see if I can answer them now, or if I'll have to dive into that a little bit. Would you mind handing me my glasses over there? Sorry, she's going to hand me my glasses real quick so I can read this piece of paper. Thank you. The question came up about what our racial makeup is of the certified police officers in the department. Great question. Off the top of my head, of those 40 officers that we have working for us, we have 3 Latino officers, 1 African American officer, an Asian officer, significant number of white officers, 3 certified female police officers. So that is kind of a quick breakdown of that and what our department looks like when it comes to a racial makeup or male-female breakdown. The question about the metrics of the frequency of the use of force, again, what Captain Pickering presented about how we capture that information. Again, that's anytime an officer is involved in a threshold event or a use of force situation, not only do they document that in a written manner in a police report, but it also goes to not only both police captains for review, but they all go to me as well, and I sign off on all of those. And what we're doing when we're reviewing those reports is not only ensuring we're doing the job the way it needed to be done, but again, we're taking that extra step to make sure that we're identifying trends or patterns that might start to appear within the department that we need to focus some time or effort on, or increase training in specific areas. So I think we do a pretty good job of that. And again, those are reviewed on an annual basis to provide a good snapshot of what's occurred in the previous year. So re-explaining the definition of use of force in the number of times it was used. So I'm going to page back here a little bit and go through this just one more time. As we start to talk about use of force and really what that means, it can mean a lot of things, and there are different levels of force. So starting off again by officer presence, just the mere fact that a police officer responded to a situation or was contacting someone or directing or asking somebody to do something well in uniform can be, interpreted as a potential use of force by just that presence being there. And then again, it escalates all the way through from giving a command or a request for somebody to do something. And then if that, is not, if they're not in a cooperating situation, we start to kind of step it up from there and potentially have to escalate based on the situation that we're dealing with to more of a potentially hands-on approach, whether it's just an empty-handed control or getting into some of those tools that police officers have available to them, the pepper spray, the taser, things like that, as we continue all the way up to what would be the highest level of lethal force. Sergeant Turner mentioned pepper spray. So you hear a lot of conversations right now about tear gas. We do not use tear gas within the Tualatin Police Department. That's not a tool that we utilize. So the most close tool that we would have to something like that would be the use of pepper spray. The use of force indicates that we've seen a decline, specifically in 2020. Well, I'll tell you, we've been
Hey,
dealing.
Chief, sorry to interrupt. Can you pull up the slide that's got the list by year?
You betcha. So we did see a decline this year. Again, this is year to date, so the year is not over. Hopefully it stays at this number. That would be the ideal situation. But we have been dealing with a different environment with a number of factors that come into play, whether it be COVID or anything related to that. There's not a specific pattern that we've identified, and you can see the numbers on the left. We are talking, a decrease potentially from 75, 76 last year to down to just over 25. I would guess at the end of the year those numbers will be a little bit higher, but nowhere close to what they were last year. So we don't have an exact reason for that, other than potentially some of those that I talked about with COVID or other issues where our call load initially went down after COVID as people kind of hunkered down in their homes to protect themselves. So we'll continue to look at that as the year progresses on what those numbers ultimately end up being at the end of the year. And then again, we do a yearly analysis of that, comparing that to our call load data and the number of events that we were involved in use of force and what levels of force were involved. Is there anything else that came through, Megan? Yeah. All right. She's gonna jot these down and then bring them over my way. I'll talk a little bit about the state statutes. So since the tragic event involving George Floyd, our legislators have met in Salem a couple times and have changed a few laws that impact us when it comes to police use of force. And again, that got into discussion of chokeholds. Something like a chokehold, I can tell you, hasn't been trained or utilized in the Tualatin Police Department for at least 15 years. I mean, that goes back quite some time. So a lot of these things that you'll hear pop up throughout the country, I'm proud to say, the way law enforcement generally operates in our local area is a little bit at a higher standard than some of the issues you'll see throughout the rest of the country. Another example of that would be the no-knock warrant conversations that take place. Oregon by law does not allow no-knock warrants, so that's not something that we've even remotely considered in a number of years. So while it might be allowed in different parts of the country, things like that are not allowed in the state of Oregon. So the question was about the use of force over the last 3 years that have resulted in the death. So yes, so we had an incident last summer. One of our officers was involved in no, that did not result in a death. I'm sorry, I was thinking that it was a shooting out near Hag Lake. You might have saw that in the media where a couple of police officers were shot. One of our officers was involved in that incident, but that did not result in the death. But that was a significant use of force that we do not typically utilize or become involved in. Prior to that, the last death that I can think of would have been Christmas of 2016. I'm going to kind of look over to my partners here to make sure I'm correct on that. Would have been December of 2016. That was an officer involved shooting just south of Sherwood on a homicide suspect out of King City that had shot a state trooper multiple times. And then prior to that would have been Memorial Day of 2016. not too far up the road from the police department on Cheyenne. Correct. Tualatin Road in Cheyenne. That was the most previous officer involved shooting that resulted in a death prior to that. So it doesn't happen frequently in our local area. So stops that are listed by ethnicity, do we compare this to Tualatin's demographics? So yes. So I'm going to go to that. I'm going to move the pictures out of the way here. So trying to think if this is I'm going to ask a question of the captain real quick. Do you know if the percentages are population breakdown, or are those the percentages for the number of staff? So we have that data. We will present that at our next meeting. But what I can tell you is that the percentages that you see here are very, very close to the population estimates that we utilize from Portland State University on what the demographic makeup is of our community. So those numbers are very, very close. If off the top of my head, I think our Hispanic Latino population is a little over 17% in the community, and the number of stops that we have reflected here is just over 16%. But we'll get those specific numbers for the next meeting for sure. Okay. So police officers deal with a lot of anxiety to keep our city safe. Are they required to get regular mental health checkups? Will police officers get training about race sensitivity? So you are very correct. There's a lot of stress that comes along with being a police officer. When we hire people, every officer that we hire will have gone through a psychological examination by a licensed psychologist. That's to get your foot in the door to become a police officer. We've been doing that for probably since the start of our department in the late 80s. It just actually became a requirement by law. I think it was last year, but again, that's something that we've been doing here locally for years and years and years. So moving on throughout a career, there is no requirement that a police officer gets an annual or a regularly scheduled visit to a psychologist. I can tell you that officers are involved in critical incidents. Those are required to make a visit to a psychologist at least twice. That's not only now in state law, but it's been common practice in our area for a number of years. So if an officer is involved in a critical incident, shooting or another similar type of event, they are required by policy and now law to go to a psychologist to make sure that they are still fit for duty. It's something that we are putting a lot of thought into, the mental health of our officers as well, and making sure that they are getting the resources they need throughout their career so that they can continue to serve our community. But again, making sure they're healthy so that they're in a healthy situation to respond to situations in the community. So it's not required that they get a yearly checkup, but we're heavily focusing our efforts on how to make sure we have a healthy workforce as well. Another one coming in. And again, I'm touching on some of these, but please, if there's additional concerns about some of those questions that have been asked, if I'm not touching on those appropriately, please let us know and we'll make sure we get a good response for each of those questions. So any training for racial profiling. So yes. So again, hopefully you'll take some time to look through our policy manual. So we have specific policies about racial profiling, how that is not acceptable, how we expect our officers to handle situations like that. We actually we report every year to the state of Oregon if we received complaints of racial-based policing and what the outcome of any investigation would have been. So again, we want to be as open and transparent and make sure our officers, again, are out there treating people the right way and not profiling or taking race into consideration when it's how they perform their daily duties. So That is not only a policy, we reemphasize that policy on a regular basis. Again, we capture all of that information in our stop data to make sure that we are where we need to be as a department serving our community. And we got one more coming. Any volunteer opportunities for kids? Well, we love volunteers. I'll tell you right now, with what we've been dealing with COVID, we don't have volunteer opportunities. So going back to March when COVID started, most of you are aware, most of our city buildings are closed to the public. Doesn't mean we've stopped service. All of our departments are continuing to provide great service to our community. The first a lobby that we were able to open was the police department. We opened that June 1st. So we don't have volunteer opportunities, and especially for honestly for kids at this point. And that is just to maintain not only the health and safety of our community members, but our department members as well. We've been doing a lot over the past few months to, again, keep our department members healthy, because if we were to have an issue with COVID internally, we only have so many police officers to serve our community. If we were to experience a loss of a number of officers that have to be, either taking care of themselves because of an illness or quarantine themselves, that would impact our ability to serve the community. So we're not having any volunteers within the building at this time. So hopefully once we can get past the COVID issue in the future, we'll be able to get people back in our building. Kids, we don't have maybe necessarily volunteer opportunities, but there's a number of ways we try to interact with our youth in a community throughout the year. We do what are called great camps. It's basically a summer camp for kids. We do that 4 separate sessions throughout the summer for kids at Hazelbrook Middle School. That normally touches about 160 kids a year when we hold those. This was the first year that we were not able to do that due to COVID, but we're looking forward to getting that back up and running next year. And that gives kids a good opportunity to start interacting with police officers on a little bit different basis than just out in the community. And again, that would be in addition to the school resource officers that we've had up until this point for a number of years. Question here is, can you summarize the changes to the Tualatin Police resulting from the state special session earlier this year? So again, fortunately for us as a department and honestly for the community, we were pretty darn close to being really up to speed on everything that was a concern at the state level. So again, the significant changes that occurred at the state level in the most recent special sessions had to do with chokeholds, which we were not currently and haven't been doing for a number of years. So that really was not an issue for us whatsoever. And then discussions about the use of tear gas, which again, we don't utilize within the department here. So the discussions that took place in the most recent 2 special sessions really didn't impact us. We were pretty much on top of those changes prior to those discussions taking place in Salem. All right. And we got one more coming. What time? I think I will take this question and then turn it back over to the mayor. Our police officers are great, but I see once in a while racial profiling. What can we do as a community to stop this? So obviously that's something we are very concerned about if that were to be occurring in our community. We encourage any police officers. So, literally we have, I would say, literally thousands and thousands of contacts with community members every single year. And if at any time a community member is not satisfied with that level of service or how they were conducted or how they were treated by a member of our staff, I would definitely ask them to reach out immediately. They can always call and ask to speak with the on-duty supervisor. They can always call in and talk to myself or the captains. We've got the ability for people to get on our police department website through the city and make a complaint or express concerns that way. So we want to hear that feedback. We're very fortunate as a community, and for me as the chief of this department, we receive a tremendous amount of support from our community. And we receive a positive feedback on a regular basis. We always have somebody saying something nice about us, but well, that is great to hear and it's nice. We want to hear that negative feedback as well, because that's going to help us learn and become better as a department. So if you ever have concerns about anything about the way you were treated or concerns you have about how our staff are conducting themselves, please let me know, let our supervisors know, so that we can start to look into that. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to the mayor. I probably rambled too much, so hopefully I didn't put the mayor to sleep. I see him moving around there.
Well, you didn't put me to sleep at all. I thought it was fascinating, some of the stats you're showing and some of the details of our use of force policy here in Tualatin and how forward-thinking our police department has been with the use of force policies. So I want to thank you, Chief Steele, Sergeant Turner, and Captain Pickering for taking time out tonight to present the use of force policies. I also want to thank you for fielding the questions and for taking the time to put the presentation together. Like you said, you try to wrap up a year and a half or so of training in an hour. So I very much appreciate it. I also like to thank the 30 odd folks who are attending tonight for spending an hour, hour and a half with us to get a little bit more educated on our use of force policies and to now take the additional step of digging into those policies, because stuff did fly by fairly quickly. Know that if you go to the city's website and you go to the community conversation subsection of the website, there are links to different documents. Chief mentioned if you have the time and want to do that, you can download the full police policy, which is 600 odd pages. But if you want to focus in on the section 300 or policy section 300, which is specifically the use of force policies for the Tualatin Police Department, that's only about 8 pages. So there is a link there before you pull down those 8 pages so you can dig into this stuff between now and the next session. Because what we're looking for is the community to review these use of force policies. And if they have the time to read the whole police policy manual and come back with more questions in session 2 for the chief and his officers and the city, so that we can be better informed, and for session 3, so that we can maybe have suggestions on any possible needed changes. So session number 2 is scheduled for November 18th from 6 to 7 p.m. It'll be a Zoom meeting again. And that session again is dedicated to answering any questions from the community that we have received between tonight and the next meeting. As you can see from the slide here, please send your questions to Megan George at her email address, mgeorge@tualatin.gov, or text her a question if you will. We also ask if you could send your contact information, just your email address is fine, because we'd like to remind you when November 18th comes back around, so that you can be reminded by the city to attend again. And we have an idea how many folks intend on attending, because the next session we might, depending how many people attend, we might break down to small groups, so that maybe groups of 3 or 4 or 5 folks can chat amongst themselves. And then at the end of that period, the ever famous group captain, if you will, reports back on the discussion of that group. So this way we can spend the hour having really good Q&A and discussions on what's going on. And then I think that's it. Have I missed anything, Megan?
I don't think so, Mayor.
All right.
Just
again,
actually, now that I think about it,
go ahead.
just a reminder that the use of force policies are also available in Spanish on our website.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. So again, thank you for attending tonight. I appreciate you all participating. Have a good evening. And again, take some time, please, to review at least the 8 pages of the police use of force, and email your contact info and or questions to Megan. Everyone have a good and safe evening, and we'll talk to you again soon. Have a good night.